year is 2024. Gaming has just gone through a pretty decent year of gaming with some gaffes here and there, and only time will tell if 2024 will be better or worse than gaming. Who the hell am I kidding? The remake of Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door is coming. This is going to be a great year in gaming. But, and there's always gotta be a but, game journalists are probably going to be even more annoying than ever before, and making fun of them is the only reasonable reaction. So I figured now is the perfect time for a good time to just mock the hell out of these so-called journalists like a heckler at a bad stand-up comedy show.
The hordes of cisgender, heterosexual, and mostly white men you'll be gaming with are incredibly sensitive to the possibility of a female within their midst.
Don't bully me, I'll come, bitch!
So let's not think too hard about these clowns who may as well be on the receiving end of the famous quote from Donald Trump.
You're fired.
I figured we'd go back in time and talk about some of the most absurd moments in game journalism. Because when you really think about how can one really mess up gaming journalism? Well, much like how an AVGN episode will ask a similar question about old games themselves, I'm going to answer that question as it's related to game journalism. It's almost like a talent that you have to be this bad about talking about video games, let alone playing them. You all know me, I'm MangaKamen, so let's just journal in these bad journalists. One of the most common critiques that a gaming journalist can get is how they can be so bad at the games they cover, to the point that some journalists want there to be a multiple skip the boss buttons and games. Even in games like Cuphead, where the entire point of the game is the boss fights, and sometimes game journalists out themselves some of the most atrocious gameplay moments that would make a toddler look like a pro. One of the most infamous ones would be Polygon's Doom footage back in 2016, or when Sekiro was the discussion about how easy mode should be implemented. There are numerous examples that you can pull from in order to showcase how terrible some of the game journalists are at their jobs, to the point that they may as well be the Homer Simpson of anything game related. For example, referring to Crash Bandicoot remake trilogy as Dark Souls. Yeah, Crash Bandicoot of all things, like Dark Souls. But for me personally, one of the most infamous examples would be all the way back in 2017, back when a simple game came out to some critical acclaim, Cuphead. For those of you who don't know this game, Cuphead is a run-and-gun side-scrolling shooter that has a focus specifically on boss fights, with additional side-scrolling sections in the game. Keep that in mind as we talk about the example, because I'm sure most people have already figured out where I'm going with this. There was a journalist called Dean Takahashi. He was recorded playing Cuphead, and he got stuck, one might say. Was it on a difficult and complex level? The kind that rack your brain a bit? Maybe he got stuck on an early boss fight before he got the hang of it. Nah, nothing understandable like that. He got stuck on the tutorial level. The internet went crazy over this, and it brought up the question about how some game journalists should even be competent enough to be playing games that they're hired to review, or even paying attention to basic instructions in the games. I mean, when you're stuck on the very first jump of the tutorial level, a level that has expressed instructions written on the background in big bold letters with explanations, then I have to wonder if you even graduated first grade writing. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I didn't have my own input at the time of the situation. I certainly did, even when it was proposed that game journalists shouldn't at least have some standard level of skill when playing games. I think it should be obvious, but I think that if you're a gaming journalist and you're actually covering a game, you should at least be somewhat skilled at the game you're covering. In the case of Dean Takahashi, he was more or less a tech guy. He was more specialized in the actual systems and such, rather than playing a finished product, or even a beta test. If he couldn't get past the tutorial, that seemed more like a bad choice to put him as reviewing an actual game. And it wasn't the first time this happened with Dean. He also had a similar situation back in 2008 with Mass Effect, where he had to write a second article where he explained such gems as forgetting to level up, and admitted that a lot of the issues he had with the game were on him as a player. It's still funny how someone who apparently has decades worth of experience in the gaming industry can't tell that jumping on enemies isn't a universal standard, especially with a game that emphasized that the main way of dealing with enemies is shooting them. How do you end up so out of touch that you've been on the Mario grind set for decades? The best and most hilarious part of this entire situation was how much people were willing to bend over backwards to defend the idea that gaming journalists should not have to be somewhat competent at a video game to talk about them. Like, I understand there's different aspects to gaming like stories, but You can't even get past the tutorial stage? You might as well rehash an old meme from Ricegum, because that's what you are.
Irrelevant!
Well, I don't think everyone needs to be an expert at games to talk about them. I'm sure as hell not an expert at every game I play. I still think you need a basic standard of skill or understanding to talk about them in reviews. At least in the gameplay department. Games require active participation. It's not a movie where you can just sit back and watch stuff happen. So if you don't get good, then you wind up looking like Captain Smoothbrain over here. And while this was later retconned as a joke because of this, the question proposed and the stereotype of low-skilled gaming journalists has been present on the internet for years. It's a stereotype that exists for a reason. You have someone who's paid to talk about video games and someone who gets to play games before they come out and write about them, but they're so incompetent that it puzzles you how these people even got their positions if they can't even understand the basics of the games they play. Now, I'm not saying every gaming journalist is like this, although from my experience I've seen a lot of them, but really one of the issues is that the rat race that comes with trying to push out their reviews first to claim all those delicious views. And as a gaming YouTuber who understands that grind, I get it. I mean, I was never as bad at games as Dean was, but I think you get my point. The problem lies with the uninformed or terrible reviews that get made on the usual suspect websites, and most of the time they stay there. They don't get updated, and the review scores remain. That's the real issue, and would only get fixed if there was a large amount of backlash. And late last year, we were given a huge video talking about plagiarism made by someone who utterly annoys me. Plagiarism is a bit of a hot-button topic, especially in the online space, and there are plenty of people who are chomping at the bit to talk about how someone plagiarized others. Because apparently that's the new internet blood sport. Of course, video game journalism has its own forays into plagiarism, with one of the most biggest examples happening in Dead Cells. For those unaware, Dead Cells is a roguelike Metrovania game and is known to be an extremely tough game. And to be clear, even in 2023, it still received updates and has a few crossovers, with Hollow Knight, Fall Guys, Hyper Light Drifter, and even Castlevania itself. Now, I'm sure there are some people already having the gears turning in their head. Yep, we're talking about one of the most infamous moments in IGN history, the time that one of their journalists plagiarized an entire review from Boomstick Gaming. The review itself was made by one Philip Mushin, who had taken loads of points in language from Boomstick Gaming, which the YouTuber himself managed to prove his point in a side-by-side comparison between the two reviews. As you can imagine, when backed with enough evidence and IGN not having the best reputation before this incident, it became like a wildfire on the internet. Redditors were Redditing, Twitter users were twittering, and Philip, he got his ass fired, and a day after Boomstick's video went up to boot. This section isn't going to be super long, that's mainly because the event was taken care of so quickly, and IGN, to their credit, did handle the situation immediately, and did the right thing by removing the review and canning Philip. But I have to wonder how many other reviews are being copied and we just don't know it. After all, one of the biggest issues about this sort of thing is that this was one of the most blatant cases, and one has to wonder how much is taken from other sources without proper credit, especially in the gaming journalism world. I'm just glad that Boomstick managed to come out on top with this. The guy's still making content to this very day, and it was practically the best thing that ever happened to him.
Let me in! Let me in!
Now, supposedly, one of the best perks about being a games journalist is that they have direct access to major gaming companies so they can get the heads up on latest releases, as well as report on any upcoming information. Or at least that's what they say. So you can imagine the hilarity that would ensue if a major gaming site got blacklisted by one of the 3 biggest gaming companies out there. And that's exactly what happened. In 2023, Nintendo had blacklisted Kotaku, a gaming website that in my humble opinion is a lot more vapid than IGN with some of the dumbest articles you've ever seen, with their slanting towards social commentary and brand of politics. This wasn't the first time that Kotaku had been blacklisted by major companies, mind you. In 2007, Sony had temporarily slapped a blacklist on the website for running a story on the PlayStation 3's features, and in 2015, Kotaku had claimed that they were blacklisted by game companies like Bethesda or Ubisoft. They got a small track record of being blacklisted. And frankly speaking, I don't blame any game companies that would want to blacklist this website. That may as well be one of the biggest problem children in gaming journalism. But yes, Nintendo blacklisted them. And it was speculated that the reason for blacklisting was because Kotaku had released articles that covered leaks in Nintendo's upcoming releases, most notably Tears of the Kingdom. However, if you want my thoughts, I think this was a long time coming. There have been a number of times where Kotaku had opened their mouths wider than a Karen in a parking lot, and consequently had to stick their own foot in their gaping black holes that you can call a mouth. Metroid Dread is already running on Switch emulators. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate Persona 5 DLC includes a disability slur, and more.
What the fuck?
Gee, I wonder why Nintendo would ever want to blacklist a website like Kotaku. Even more so when you recall that one of the senior reporters for Kotaku thought it'd be a good idea to complain about the blacklisting publicly on Twitter. It's preview day for Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, a huge game I would love for Kotaku to be able to inform its millions of readers about firsthand. Unfortunately, Nintendo still has it blacklisted from advanced coverage, a move I would argue is both unprofessional and coercive. And professional, eh? Gee, it'd suck if there was another Kotaku writer who acted really unprofessional about the blacklist and oh wait!
Meine Arbeit für richtig hältst. Ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe.
Well, that's just bad timing. Now, to be completely fair, a former employee in charge did state that Nintendo blacklisted them after they apparently were denied line editing. However, there's nothing really to back this up, and considering the track record that Kotaku has, I'd rather err on the side of skepticism with this one personally. Regardless of the reason, it's still a big gaffe on these journalists and how they reacted to the situation certainly didn't help with their credibility on the situation either.
No! No! No!
Now, while I don't believe that all journalists are bad, you have to admit that the dumb journalists certainly do take up quite a bit of screen time. And there's good reason for that. It's because some of the dumbest takes are made that way on purpose. You can't tell me that when you read the title of this article, you don't go and say, "Wait a minute, she ain't from Mortal Kombat. This is that woman with the deadly thighs from Street Fighter." Something that could easily be fact-checked by a simple Google search. Really shows the laziness of these half-wit bird-brained companies that are willing to completely make up controversies for their own clout and views. Or if you become a much more cynical person, much like I've become one over the past few years, it shows how malicious these journalists are when they fake their own incompetence just for views, especially when they try to make claims that directly contradict their own user base's opinions just to rile people up.
Okay. I think we're at the point where we need to admit that this was never really a great franchise.
It's a simple way to get people's attention, get their clicks, and of course, traffic to your sites. It's the basic model of farming outrage, and I'd be damned if I didn't say it was effective. I'm technically doing it right now with the title you see below this video. To be frank, I could probably spend the rest of this section just showing titles for some of the dumber things that journalists have said, and that most people would probably just enjoy that sort of thing. Take for example an older and oddly enough more recent example of Digital Foundry's opinion about Project Eve, aka Stellar Blade.
One thing about, so the character designs and the character renderings, character models, so let's say that they're kind of from a bygone era in some ways, in many ways maybe. So it's kind of interesting to see this mix of, I shouldn't say classic character designs, but character models from a bygone era put into a modern game.
It is weird, it feels a little out of place, I think.
Well, the game feels a bit out of place.
I do think the character model was actually like very distracting in not a good way. It's like a bit old and not flattering, I don't think, for a modern audience. In comparison to something like Forspoken.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think my brain just committed.
And then it just comes out recently that the developers used a 3D scan of an actual model. You know, real woman.
What? No, dude!
Stuff like this is just plain stupid, since you know that even with this fact, people are gonna clamp their ears shut and ignore it. It's almost done on purpose because who doesn't love watching a car wreck happen in real time? Even more so when a situation is blown out of proportion. Although I would argue that in some instances of what these reviewers, journalists, and websites put out there are masterclasses in stupidity. So after all this, what can I say? I don't know. I think journalists, especially for games, are really fun to laugh at. Is it low-hanging fruit? Yep. Is it easy content? Oh hell yeah. Are video game journalists ever gonna change? Hell no. At least not in my opinion. Well, only time will tell, my friends. I'm MangaKamen, and adios for now, amigos. Later.